Hey, Emily. Welcome back.
Hello.
So we're just going to have to do presenting from my iPad. I followed all the directions and it's still grayed out, so I'll have to go to a store later, but we will present from my iPad.
I wish I knew more about Zoom, but
Me too. So we'll just go from the iPad and I will share all of my PowerPoints with you guys so that you have them. Yeah, and we'll go from there. So unfortunately, that's a bummer, but got to do what we got to do. So you guys let me know. Let me turn this ring light off. It's very dark down here. Is this okay for anybody watching?
the picture is nice, but it's hard to read the words.
Okay.
You can see like where the circles and everything, arrows are pointing.
Okay. So we're talking about lower limb anatomy and about taping it. So I really love lower limb anatomy. I personally, like my group around back home, like my group that I learned the most from and kind of bounce ideas off of is mostly farriers. So it's really made me fall in love with the lower limb. At all of their conventions, they teach so much anatomy. I think it is super amazing. In my experience and body work and like those type of clinics, anatomy is sort of addressed, but not nearly as much. And on all the farrier conventions I've been to, they really hit anatomy hard. And I think it's so fascinating because it matters. So I just wanted to hit on some of that and talk about how we can work on tape with the lower legs. So lower legs are the area that I feel we need to be most cautious with in taping. I'm not really afraid of teaching owners how to use tape. That's a question that people ask me a lot. They're like, as you teach owners how to use tape, are you afraid they're going to injure something? No, tape is super safe, but the lower leg would be where my biggest concern would be. So I like to talk about it. More we know about it, the safer we are, right? So I will share all of these with you guys, but the first thing I wanted to cover is basically just our directions of anatomy. So closer to the center of mass is proximal. Farther away from the center of mass is distal. So distal distance. So right now my finger is distal to my elbow. So these terms are used in relation to another body part. So the hoof is distal to the fetlock. Proximal, the fetlock is proximal to the hoof. Medial is going to be the middle. So my thumbs are medial to my middle fingers. My pinkies are lateral to my middle fingers. Okay. I think a lot of us in here are familiar with that, but I just wanted to cover that before we moved on. So what I think is super cool, first thing we're going to talk about is the difference in the front limb and hind limb. So the front limb is a lot more vertical. The orientation of the entire limb is a lot more vertical. And the orientation of the hind limb has a lot more sharp acute angles as it comes from the sacrum back forward to the stifle, back down to the hock, and then down to the fetlock. So an oversimplified explanation of the two limbs is that the hind limb is the gas pedal, front limb is the brake pedal. It's a very oversimplified definition, but their hind limb is used to drive them and propel them forward. The front limb is used to basically slow them down so that their hind limbs can come around and then propel them forward again. So those are the different mechanics of the front limb versus the hind limb. Because they have different roles, they have different shapes. So let's start with the foot. The hind limb, the hind coffin bones are more upright and more pointy. Like you can just look at pretty much any horse and see that their hind feet are skinnier, a little bit more forward, and even the shape of the coffin bone is a little bit more peaked, it's taller, and it's made to be more like a propeller. So they put their toes in the ground and that's what drives them forward, is that hind leg. Everything in their leg reflects that. As you go up to the coronary band, up to the cannon bone, they have a more egg-like oval shape to their cannon bone compared to the front legs. The front hoof is more round. The front cannon bone is more round because it's not as much of that propelling force. You can tell the difference in a right and a left. So just like us, horses have a taller medial side. So if you look at my index finger compared to my pinky finger, you can see that my medial side is a little bit taller. Same thing on our feet. Compare your big toe to your pinky toe. So the medial side isn't quite as rounded off. Horses are the same way. They don't have a perfectly round toe. And their cannon bone's the same way. So the medial side of the cannon bone actually is a little bit taller from the lateral side. So this is where it would be really wonderful for you to see a picture. I'll show it to you later. It's just a picture of a horseshoe. And I was going to ask you guys to tell me, is this a right or a left horseshoe? I'm not going to tell you the answer because I want to share the picture with you later and you tell me if you think it's a right or a left horseshoe. So that's something that's pretty cool that is really important if you prefer your horses shod and you want shoes on them. I think it's super important that your farrier has forging skills. They're able to accommodate the shape of that horse's foot. It's not just a round shape on their toe because they have different functions. Because of that, because on their hind legs, that medial side's a little bit taller and it's pulling forward, it's taking more force, which means they have more injuries on the medial side. We see a medial patellar ligament injury way more than we see a lateral patellar ligament injury because the weight and the force is coming through the medial side of the foot. Same thing on the fronts. So I'll share that picture with you later, but that's where I wanted to start. There's a difference in the front and the hind, and there's a difference in their function. That means there's a difference in their shape as well. So this is a forelimb. It's a little bit straighter and more vertical than the hind limb. So again, I'll share all of this with you later. This is, I mean, this entire thing is not completely all inclusive because we're not farriers, right? But it's super important to know all of this whenever you're taping it. This is my favorite picture of the lower limb, like maybe ever. I might say that a couple times as we go through, but I think it's just a really beautiful example of the tensegrity of the lower leg. If you can see how all of the soft tissues cross over each other and make X's over each other and create this nice bow and arrow type, like there's tension and there's compression, it just makes this super, super fascinating functional leg. If we think about putting a horse on basically 4 table legs that seem way too small for the size of their body, it doesn't make sense that they should be as athletic as they are, but it's super cool. So I'm essentially going to walk you through this without the graphic, but closest to the bone, we're starting below the carpal. This is the front leg. So closest to the bone, you have your suspensory. It runs right along your bone and then it bifurcates, which means it splits right above your sesamoids, which are the 2 bones on the back of your fetlock. Once your suspensory bifurcates, it wraps around the fetlock. Actually, it wraps around P2, and then it attaches on your extensor tendon. Now, your extensor tendon comes down the front of your leg, and that's what lifts their toe up and gets their toe out of the way. So we have the bone, we have the suspensory ligament, then we have the deep digital flexor tendon. So the deep digital flexor tendon runs all the way down and attaches on their hoof. So it runs all the way down behind P1, P2, and attaches on the bottom of P3. So that's what flexes all the way down to the bottom of their foot. Then we have the superficial flexor tendon. So we have the bone, suspensory, deep digital, superficial flexor tendon. So this is going to come down and it's the most superficial, hence its name. And it comes down and it attaches on P2. So it doesn't go all the way down to P3 like the deep digital, it attaches on P2. So that's the basic anatomy of the soft tissue structures in the lower leg. I'm just going to keep complaining about how I didn't get my ducks in a row because this is going to be super amazing when you guys could see all this. I might just redo this whole entire thing. And you're welcome to join if you want to hear it twice, but I really want to be able to present it with it on the screen. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is when there are like check ligaments and collateral ligaments. A lot of people will ask me, how do you tape a check ligament? Well, which check ligament? How do you tape a collateral ligament? Which collateral ligament? So understanding what that is. So once again, try to see if you can see this really fast. So essentially what the check ligaments are doing is holding the soft tissues against the bone so that they don't bow off of the bone. So in humans, we have pulleys. So on our finger, it's like the eyelets on a fishing pole, and the fishing string, which would be your flexor tendons, is running through the eyelets on the fishing pole. So we have pulleys at the base of our finger and as you go up the finger that keep the tendon pushed up against the bone so that we don't have this bowing motion where as we bend, the flexor tendon stays against our bone instead of coming straight down and taking the path of least resistance. So that's the same purpose of the check ligament. Collateral ligaments help create joint stability. And once again, there's multiple collateral ligaments. So right here, we have collateral ligaments of the fetlock and the sesamoids. Whoops. Right here, oh my goodness. Right here, we have the collateral ligaments of the pastern. And then right here, this is most commonly referred to as the collateral ligament, but this is of the coffin joint. So we have 3 different sets of collateral ligaments just in the bottom 3 joints. And then finally, I wanted to show you the arteries. So one of the things that we can do with tape is increase blood flow, right? So it's nice to know that we have arteries that are running right where we would put our application. So my most common taping application is what I call the general fetlock support, because it really does so much. That picture that I said was one of my favorite pictures really shows you the perfect harmonious balance of all the structures. Like you're not going to tape the suspensory and not affect the deep digital flexor tendon. You're not going to tape the deep digital flexor tendon and not affect the superficial flexor tendon. So there's that one application that I really like, that when you support the fetlock, you're supporting all of them. Like I said, we can't separate out one and not address anything else. Same thing with an annular ligament injury. That general fetlock support is great for all of it because it's supporting everything that needs to be supported. So now we're going to switch over to a different presentation. And we're going to talk about tendon injuries. So tendon injuries. So to start off, what is a tendon? So a tendon is anything that attaches bone to muscle. So it's basically the pulley system in our body. If I can get out of this, goodness. So tendons are the pulley system in our body. So just like whenever we move our fingers, there's no muscle in my hand that's moving my fingers. All of my muscles are down in my forearm, but all of the tendons come up and attach at different points on my fingers, and that's how we get that motion. So like I said, it's like a pulley system in the body. So what is a tendon injury? A tendon injury is basically any damage that's done to the collagen fibers. So tendons are made up mostly of collagen fibers, and that means that they don't heal super well. They don't have great circulation. They take a long time to heal. So the average tendon healing time is about 12 months. So inflammation in the tendon typically results in rearrangement of the collagen fibers, and then we get that really common presentation of that knot on the back of the leg whenever we recognize a tendon injury. So if you've ever seen a tendon injury, it's pretty obvious if it's a pretty significant tear or damage. And that far illustration side, you can see what it looks like within the fibers whenever it's injured. And that's why we get that hemorrhage look, is because those fibers have been disrupted. So what does vet involvement include? So of course, the diagnosis itself, which can be done with ultrasound, or it can be done with MRI. So a lot of times if it's up high, it can be found with ultrasound. And then if it's down low, like if it's the deep digital flexor tendon where it runs along the navicular bone or P3, you'll need MRI to see down that far. You'll need a vet involved for treatment sometimes if it's bad enough. They can do stem cells. So a lot of times what they'll do is they'll take out the bone marrow from their sternum and then inject that in the tendon. And what that does is it helps stimulate collagen growth to help that tendon heal itself. It's important to keep them moving, keep them walking, because you want those collagen fibers to lay down in a nice flat pattern instead of just being tangled up and matted up. Just like whenever we talk about fascia with tape, we want those fibers to be laying down functionally, not just patching and making a Band-Aid that's not functional. So other treatment for tendon injuries can be cold therapy of any kind, cold hosing, compression, stabilization, immobilizing it to a certain degree. Laser therapy is great. Water rehab is great. Takes a little bit of the force off. And walking. Walking is excellent for prevention, making sure that you walk 20 minutes as a good warm-up before you start actually doing an exercise. This is great to educate your clients on. Clients like super simple tips. So if you can tell them before any type of workout you do, I want you to do a 20-minute warm-up of walking. Sometimes they'll do it, sometimes they won't, but it's a good tip that you can give them. So some causes of tendon injury is just trauma. Maybe they kicked something, maybe they got cut, maybe they fell, so a trauma. Age, as they get older, they can lose the elasticity in those tendons. Poor conformation. So hock joint angles, any greater than 150, put them in a high risk. So straight hocks, put them at a really high risk for lower level or lower leg tendon injuries, especially suspensory branches. Ooh, sorry, had a lot of coffee and my words are tangled up today. So poor conformation. Also the other direction, any tighter of an angle in the hocks than 130. So 130 to 150, it really is your perfect spot to be for good hock joints. That's something simple, again, that you can teach people. If they are shopping for horses, teach them what a goniometer is. If you don't know what a goniometer is, it's a tool that helps you measure joint angles. There are lots of cool apps that you can get on your phone. You can take a picture. You can put the center of your angle right in the middle of their hock. You can draw up the leg and down the leg. And on your phone, if you have a picture of the horse from the side, you can tell the angle that they have on their hock, and you can predict what kind of health they'll have in their lower legs with their soft tissue. Again, something super easy and simple that you can teach horse owners to do. More causes could be the ground. So a ground that's super, super deep. I'm in the Western world a lot of times. So people that want barrel racers specifically that want like a nice deep ground, that's not always easy on their soft tissue, on their ligaments and their tendons. Same thing with really hard ground though. If it's really hard and it's too concussive, then that's not good either. So we need a happy medium. High speed work puts them at risk for tendon and suspensory ligament injuries. Lack of conditioning. So remember, a tendon is just an extension of the muscle. So if the muscle is highly fatigued, not contracting correctly and not stabilizing the joint correctly, fatigue a lot of times can lead to ligament and tendon injuries. Lack of warming up. Like I said earlier, if you're not taking at least 20 minutes to walk and really warm up those tissues, slow wins the race. You're putting yourself at a higher risk there. Going back to tape again, increasing joint awareness. Joint proprioception is so good for increasing their stabilization of their own joints. If they're stabilizing their own joints, they're going to keep those soft tissues at a lower risk of injury. Like I said, decreasing fatigue. I can share a couple articles that show how tape decreases fatigue just by increasing awareness. It's always about the nervous system with tape. So this is a graphic I really, really want you to see. So we have 3 different presentations here. So the very first one is if you have a superficial digital flexor tendon injury, that's going to make the fetlock drop. Okay. If you have a deep digital flexor tendon injury, the toe will turn upwards. Well, that makes sense, right? Because the superficial flexor inserts on P2. So if we lose that stabilization, we'll have a dropped fetlock. The deep digital inserts onto P3, which is their toe. So if we lose that stability or that suspension, then their toe pops up. So if we have a superficial and a deep digital flexor tendon, we have both a fetlock drop and the toe turns up. Now, if we have superficial and deep and suspensory ligament injury or tear, the fetlock will literally rest on the ground and the toe will turn up. Once again, it always goes back to anatomy. When you understand your anatomy super well, the presentation makes absolute sense. There's no other presentation it could be, right? It's also important to note that the suspensory and the flexor tendons are antagonistic as far as forces go. So wedges are super common for offloading our flexor tendons. But if we put our horse in a wedge, it's necessary if they're rehabbing, right? Like we got to take some stress off of that deep digital flexor tendon. But when you put them in a wedge and offload the deep digital or superficial flexor tendon, you're increasing the force in your suspensory. That means that they need to be weaned out of it eventually and gradually. So as they're healing, as they're progressing, your farrier is 100% capable enough to progress them out of what they need to be progressed out of. They might need specialized shoes on the unaffected side as well. If they're overcompensating on the unaffected side, it can increase their risk for laminitis because they're putting so much force on that leg. Again, your farrier will be great in dealing with that. There are lots of great farriers out there. Like I said, I hang out with a lot of them. They're super cool. Looking at bony issues of the lower leg, looking at side bone and ring bone. So even though they're bony issues, a lot of times the problem comes from soft tissue, because if you think about going back to that beautiful picture that I said I super duper loved, everything's attaching on a bone somewhere. So all these soft tissues are attaching on a bone. Well, that's not true. Sometimes they can attach to each other. So the suspensory is attaching to the extensor. But something's attaching to the bone. So whenever that imbalanced force on the soft tissue is continually rubbing on those bones, anywhere there's heat in the body is going to produce more bone to protect itself. So what ring bone is additional, and you're not going to be able to see these on here because these are actual radiographs. I don't think that you'll be able to see them without having access to the actual PDF. So this is a horse of my own. I don't know if you can see his ring bone that he has going on right here. But essentially, the body's laying down additional bone on their on P2 to help protect itself, to help protect itself. So you have your extensor tendon that runs along there and your suspensory that comes around and attaches right there. Side bone, you'll be able to see these better. I'll show you the super dramatic one. Side bone is ossification of your collateral ligaments. So this is a really dramatic example, but you can see that bone on the side that's shooting way up into the coronary plexus. So side bone is just ossification of your collateral ligaments. Again, where there's heat in the body responds and tries to protect itself and ossifies the bones for protection. So that's all I have on my presentation. Thank you guys so much for your patience. Like I said, I think I will go to an Apple store right now and get this figured out. And then I may just redo this entire presentation tomorrow. If you want to see it a second time, you're welcome to. And if not, that's okay. But if you guys have any questions, let me know. I will get these PDFs to you so that you guys can see them and download them and have them and look at them. I know there will be a lot of questions because it'll be the first time you've had it in your hands without me presenting it to you. So thank you, Emily and Karen, for being with me. I will get these to you. Oh, and I'll get this picture of this shoe to you. And I want you guys to tell me if it's a right shoe or a left shoe. So Yeah, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome.